So hi, this is Reggie speaking about healing America's narratives. And what I'm going to do for the next 30 to 40 minutes is provide an introduction to a preview of the book, but more specifically, what some people have asked for is a preview of the 90-minute introduction to the book, which I do in people's homes. I do it in libraries. I do it in classrooms, wherever they'll let me in, but also a preview of the 15-hour course, which takes a deeper dive, goes into much more detail with each chapter, and involves the students or participants in a much deeper way. So without giving you too much more of an introduction to this introduction, I'm going to share the screen and just walk you through basically what the book does, why it was written. It was published in September of 2022. And you can see here on the screen now the front cover of the book, some of the comments and reviews that the book received early on. But more specifically, let's get into the language of the book and its basic premise. So the title is Healing America's Narratives: The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human. And that's exactly what the book explores. It basically takes a look at the situation in the United States in this third decade of the 21st century. So what we're going to do in the next, as I said, 30 minutes or so, is go through these bullet points. I'm not going to leave them up there for long. I'm not going to read them at you, but that's basically what we're going to cover in the next 30 minutes or so. The basic premise of the book is that the mood of the United States in this third decade of the 21st century is not surprising. And in fact, it's inevitable. If you take a look at it through developmental psychology, through a real honest look at history, an integrative, honest look at history and culture, we'll see that where we are in the country, again, third decade of the 21st century, is not only not surprising, but it's pretty much inevitable. A problem that exacerbates our history and our psychology is that many performance news celebrities and politicians, including those that I vote for, and many Americans at large, including me, you, we tend to deny and distort history and current events and don't see or refuse to acknowledge these distortions and denials. I'm trying to remedy my own version of that. So along with social media and access to more information than we've ever had access to before, we're also faced with a corrupted information environment. There's just so much coming at us that any sense of what's true or false, especially with some deliberate bad actors who provide us with disinformation and misinformation, the culture is doing what it does, but getting any kind of agreement on what's true or false and what needs to be done is increasingly more difficult. That's the exacerbating problem. So a big part of what the book goes through is what I refer to as cultural givens. Every human being born anywhere on this planet at any time since humans emerged has a set of cultural givens. And that's basically the view of the world that each of us is given, typically by our family of origin, by our local community, by our environment, by our year of birth, what was going on the planet the year we were born. Our geography makes a difference. And we're given a view of the world as young children. It's based on, as I said, climate, ethnicity, religion or lack thereof, what our parents believed, and then our own direct experiences. What happens to us as young children informs what we are given. Now we continue to be given things from the culture throughout our lives, but these early givens in our formative years are extraordinarily powerful. So it's our task, beginning in adolescence, sometimes earlier, but beginning in adolescence, to begin to question what was given and see how it aligns with our direct experience of our lives. And adolescence is pretty much, healthy adolescence is designed to do that. But many of us make it into our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, to our deathbeds without ever questioning our cultural givens. And in the absence of an awareness of how our givens provide a lens through which we experience the world, we will continue to view the world based on the lenses we were given. And as healthy adults, we have to question those lenses, embrace what still holds up, revise or let go what no longer holds up. And I go into a great deal of detail with my own cultural givens in the book, and any one of you who are listening to this could do this yourselves right now. One of the most striking talks I ever heard, and I heard this on television, was on September 23rd, 2001, during the memorial service for the surviving family members and colleagues of those first responders and some others who died on September 11th, 2001. There were many celebrities there. I think Oprah Winfrey hosted it. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York at the time. There were representatives of every religion on the planet, pretty much, because they were representatives of every religion in New York, which is a fairly representative place compared to many smaller towns. But Rabbi Mark Gelman, who at the time was the dean of the College of Rabbis in New York City, he was one of the speakers. And what he said riveted me. So what's up on the screen here is an excerpt, a brief excerpt of what he said. But he made the point that when we speak about large numbers of deaths at one time, so 6,000 people or 6 million people died, and at the time he made this speech, we didn't know the numbers of people who had died on September 11th yet. So the estimate was around 6,000. That's why that number is here. He spoke about that the real horror being in the death of one person 6,000 times. And that's how I believe American history should be viewed. The lives and deaths of each of us, not just the presidents and the generals and these big groups of victims or these big groups of perpetrators, but each life, one at a time. So we're going to return to that theme throughout the book, to a lesser degree in this brief synopsis of the book. So the word healing in the title doesn't mean fixing something or curing something, but it simply means coming to terms with things as they are, getting as clear as I can as what's true in this moment, whether I like what's true or not, whether I'm trying to change what's true in this moment, but coming to terms with what is true. And because if I don't do that, if I'm deluded or I deny what's true, I can never really move into wholeness, which is where healing leads us. So healing is coming to terms with what is true in the moment, so I can integrate that truth into who I am and move increasingly toward wholeness. So that's how we're using that word. Narrative. When I speak about healing America's narratives, I'm simply using the word narrative as a synonym for story. There are many stories in America, individual stories, group stories, religious stories, political stories, ethnic stories, stories. And so when I speak about healing America's narratives, I'm speaking about coming to terms with healing the many stories that inform the United States and the mythical story, the big story of America, kind of like the ideal of America. You know, one of the reasons the founders put in to their language moving toward a more perfect union, because they knew it wasn't perfect. So any narrative by anyone always contains either a conscious or an unconscious interpretation of events. In other words, there is no purely objective narrative. There's always a little bit of interpretation. Sometimes there's a big chunk of interpretation that even distorts, the true events, but all of us interpret as we tell stories. So before, the subtitle of the book is The Feminine, the Masculine, and our collective national shadow. So I want to go through that language one step at a time, and I'm going to be using the words healthy and unhealthy throughout the book, and you'll see what I mean by healthy and unhealthy as we go. So the healthy feminine is that spirit or energy that tends toward relationship, community, compassion, mercy, intimacy, embrace, and other things. And we're not speaking about women when we say the healthy feminine, although we're including them, but we're speaking about an energy or a way of being in the world that any man, woman, or gender fluid person can have in a healthy or unhealthy way. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot and my throat's a bit dry. So that's the healthy feminine. When the feminine energy emerges in an unhealthy way, the individual in whom that happens can lose their sense of agency, their sense of self-efficacy, their sense of self-value, and can move into a situation where there's codependence, can lose a sense of identity outside of any relationship, and often internalizes anger and frustration. So they think they're a bad person or they're weak because they turn all of their frustration and anger inward. Really brief synopsis, first of the healthy feminine, second of the unhealthy feminine. So the healthy masculine is a spirit or energy, again, that any man, woman, or non-binary person or gender fluid person could have, that tends toward individualism as opposed to community, towards solitude as opposed to intimacy, toward wisdom as opposed to compassion, toward justice as opposed to mercy, toward agency as opposed to community. So it's the masculine and the feminine are the yin and yang of being humid. I just said humid and I meant human. Okay, so that's the healthy masculine. The unhealthy masculine, as you might imagine, can lead to a lack of compassion, a lack of mercy, a lack of emotional competence or regulation. And the unhealthy masculine tends to, and men often tend to, externalize their anger and frustration. So they go out and blame somebody else, and they punch somebody else, or they bomb somebody else. Okay, so we have the healthy and unhealthy feminine and masculine energies. And again, in the book, in a 15-hour course, we take a deeper dive into those. Development also comes into play. The word development is not in the title or the subtitle of the book, but it's going to give us, along with the masculine and the feminine, our approach to identifying the collective shadow of the United States. So it's important to say this here. So over 50 years of longitudinal studies, of real research into adult development. We have much more of, we have many more years of research into childhood development, beginning, right out of the womb, even prenatal development. But for years, it was believed that once you got to be about 18 to 22 years old, your development was done. You had this much brain power, you could always get more knowledge, but you didn't really develop further. And beginning with Robert Keegan at Harvard back in the 70s, we now know that's simply not true, and many more researchers beyond Keegan. So we can continue to grow through increasingly inclusive, balanced, comprehensive, and complex perspectives. And when we're speaking about development in this book, we're speaking specifically about the ability, the development of awareness, to take broader and broader and deeper views of ourselves and the world. Depending on whose research you follow, there are anywhere from 4 to 8 to 12 stages of development for adults. We're going to use a shorthand that captures the essence of what I think is important for the arguments made in the book. This shorthand holds up in all the models. It just leaves out some more granular stages. So an early stage of development is it's about me. It's just about me. And that's necessary when we're infants and toddlers, because that's how we get our needs met. Okay. If it's just about me, when I'm in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, some people might call that narcissism, but I tend not to pay attention to the needs of others. Not a healthy way to be. All right. The next move from it's about me is to it's about us, and us can refer to any group, and a group can be two or more people. So my us can be me and my significant other. It can be me and my family of origin. It can be me and my religion, me and my ethnicity, me and my nation, me and my sports team, me and my corporate team, whatever it happens to be. So it's us or group centric, and that can be healthy or unhealthy as well. Group centrism is healthy as long as it sees itself as us and them, or us with them, where them is some other group. When it becomes us against them, it's unhealthy. I argue in the book that the major catastrophes in the history of the United States grew out of an unhealthy us-centric view, us against them. All right, we'll bomb them, we'll kill them, we'll take their land, we'll cheat them, we'll enslave them. All right. The next move from just me and my group is me and all humans. It's about all of us, and this is a specifically human-centric stage of development, or species-centric, and that makes it possible for me to look at somebody, regardless of their skin pigmentation, their religious beliefs or lack thereof, their sexual orientation, their sexual identity, how they look, their height, their weight, whatever, as just another human being, another person just like me. And that makes it increasingly more difficult to do bad things to them. Then the last step, it's about all that is a universe or cosmos-centric view where I really identify with all of it. Call it creation, call it the universe, call it spirit, call it the Godhead, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to bicker about vocabulary choices here. In that situation, it's extraordinarily difficult to do harm to any living thing or the planet as a whole. So it's about me, it's about us, it's about all of us, about all that is, and any one of those, at least up until that final one, can be healthy or unhealthy. Although I think it's about all that is, if we call that a spiritual way of being, there is such a thing as a spiritual bypass where people kind of get into their meditation and they're just, everything is, okay in the unmanifest realm, and they ignore the actual problems facing them or their family or the planet. And so that's probably, spiritual bypass is probably an unhealthy iteration of all that is. All right, so there's the developmental synopsis. Shadow. Again, the subtitle of the book is The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. So shadow is that which any individual, organization, or nation denies or does not see in itself and tends to project onto others. Oh, I'm not violent, you're violent. We're not mean, you're mean. We're not corrupt, they're corrupt. You can see where that goes. For most of us, it's about, I'm not angry, everybody else is angry. I don't have any anger, I'm not an angry person. So we explore that in the book, How to Navigate Shadow. But more specifically, we want to see about the collective national shadow of the United States. So I identified 9 elements of America's shadow, and I played with this particular slide to have it fade away and make it harder to see. I apologize for that. Here's a clearer slide. So the 9 elements that were existent in the founding of the country, throughout our history, and still today, of what we deny as a nation include ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. We unpack each one of those in detail in the book and in the 15-hour course. You can use your imagination and find examples of them yourself, because you're obviously a smart, thoughtful person. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this. That was kind of like a joke. All right. So these people again. So we now have a sense of what it means to heal, what narrative means, what shadow is, what the feminine and masculine refer to, what development refers to. Most performance news celebrities and politicians, and again, when I say politicians, including most of those I vote for, that I agree with, not all of them, but most of them, and the rest of us, we're unaware of, and we choose to ignore the shadow. Most, I think, are unaware of it, as opposed to choosing to ignore it. The specifics of our ignorance, I said there in the slide, but I'll say our ignorance, and our levels of untrustworthiness differ. But the manifestations of the ignorance and arrogance and bullying are very, very similar. Doesn't matter, which news show you tune into. When they get into their arrogance and their bullying and their ignorance, they were doing the same thing as the people on the other side of the political spectrum. It happens in the Congress. It happens out in political rallies. None of us is immune to it. So that's a problem. So to summarize, America's collective national shadow, that which as a nation, tens of millions of us deny, emerges through an unhealthy manifestation of masculine, us-centric energy amid a virtual absence of healthy feminine energy. So again, we're not saying men are the shadow and women are the solution. We're saying that the collective national shadow of this country emerges through a dominance, whether it's embodied in a man or a woman or a non-binary person, a dominance of unhealthy, us or group-centric masculine energy. And we need a balance of healthy feminine energy to bring that masculine energy back into a healthy iteration and to allow us to grow past our us-centrism into an all-of-us centrism, and maybe someday into an all that is centrism. So that's the shadow right there. And that's at the base of virtually every problem that we face. It's not the only thing there, but it's what keeps it hidden. So the book unpacks what I call 3 foundational subjugations in American history and current events. In chapter 3, we take a look at the original subjugation, I might call it. So that's the fear of the feminine and the subjugation of women. I'm not going to say a lot about that right now. I'm going to go through each chapter very briefly. The second of the foundational subjugations is that of Native Americans, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, specifically North America in our case. And that's chapter 4, entitled Trails of Tears and Broken Treaties. The third foundational subjugation in this country, and they're not 1, 2, and 3 in terms of order of importance. They're there in order of how they emerge, because the fear of the feminine and the subjugation of women was already in place in Europe before the Europeans kidnapped Africans and invaded the Americas. That's why they're chronologically in that order. Chapter 5 is the subjugation of Africans first, enslaving them, and then African Americans once America was formed. So slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights, and everything was going to change now. So those are the foundational 3 subjugations. Then there are 2 more detailed chapters that add on 2 more examples of that type of subjugation, done differently though. Chapter 6 goes into dominoes, defoliation, death, and democracy. That's the Vietnam War, where we basically used our ignorance, arrogance, and violence in an attempt to subjugate the Vietnamese people. We kind of know how that turned out. And then we continued that theme on learning nothing from the lessons of Vietnam and in our post 9/11 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, entitled Lessons Not Learned, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. That's chapter 7. Chapter 8 is a chapter in which I apologize to many other subjugations and shadow examples that I gave a few pages to in chapter 8, but didn't give a full chapter to because I didn't want to write a 3,000-page book. I wanted to get it finished. So you can see some of the images here that give you a sense of what some of those other examples of our shadow are. But more to the point, there's the same images, ambivalence about the planet, call that global warming or climate change, a nationwide epidemic of depression, anxiety, and addiction, our culture of violence, especially but not only gun violence, our general historical valuing money, things, and beliefs over people and other living things, and we make that argument clearly in the book. Relentless othering of anyone who is different than we see ourselves as being, and that's a problem with that group-centric view again. A generalized lack of health and caring. Another way to say that is a problem with the for-profit healthcare system. Our corrupted information environment, which I referred to earlier, and our narrow, short-sighted approach to problem solving. Those last one attributable to the great work of Daniel Schmachtenberger, who argues that's one of the key things we have to change as a species if we want to survive, because we've always had narrow, issue-specific approaches to solving our problems, and we tend to exacerbate other problems and create new ones when we do that. That's chapter 8. Chapter 9 takes a look at the current American sports of bullying, saying I'm woke, or criticizing woke as a problem that's ruining America, and canceling people for a variety of reasons. And we do that in a polarized country. Woke and cancel are relatively new words in our vocabulary, not brand new. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts of their history, but the argument is made in the book that there is an unhealthy iteration of wokeism. Woke began as just meaning alert to or aware of important things socially. That's all it meant. Stay awake and alert to see what's going on. And it primarily was used first in the South in the first third of the 20th century to stay certain places. Stay woke when you go there, because it's not a safe place for Black people. Some people who think they're woke began using wokeness as a weapon pretty much in the first 3 decades of the 21st century, and began saying that, you're not woke, so something wrong with you. And people began to use that as a weapon against those people who would use it as a weapon. So it's a mess. But if we go back to before America was founded, the Europeans, and let's just stay with the British for now since they founded the United States. We'll leave the Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Dutch off the page for a bit, but they had some of the same issues. With their religion, Christianity, various iterations of Christianity, and with their cultures in Europe, when they encountered Africans and indigenous peoples of the Americas, they felt they were superior to them. Another way to say that would be more woke than them. So they tried to cancel them, literally. Right? Literally tried to cancel the cultures of the Africans they kidnapped and enslaved, and literally tried to cancel the cultures of the indigenous peoples of the United States. So even though the language was different, the sense of feeling superior, which is the corrupted use of the word woke, feeling I'm more aware of what's going on than someone else. Again, that's the corrupted meaning of the word woke. That's been going on for centuries. It's not a new thing. Finally, almost finally, penultimately, chapter 10. So in chapter 10, I make the argument that Donald Trump embodies all 9 traits of the American shadow. So if you think, is it possible for one person to do that? Absolutely is. And he's definitely one of the people who embodies all 9 traits. The book began in 2016 as a blog post before he was elected president of the United States, when I saw his performances in the Republican primaries, in the debates. I just recognized that he embodied all of the bad things in this country. And so this is kind of like a little joke here, because the rest of the people up here, some are famous, some are not so famous. He is the only one that comes close to this kind of embodiment of all of the shadow. And chapter 10 makes the argument in great detail of how he embodies all of this. Okay. Chapter 11 introduces us to some of the solutions. Okay, so now what? You gave us all these problems, Mr. Marra. What is it that you are going to offer us to begin to resolve them? So it begins with 7 questions and statements. I'm not going to read them at you. I'm just going to show them to you here and go through each one really quickly. So who am I really? If you haven't explored that yet in your life, start today. Because you might respond as from a body-mind perspective. You might respond from a soul-based perspective. You might respond from a spirit perspective. You might respond from a perspective that integrates body, mind, soul, and spirit, or something else entirely. It makes a difference what your perspective is when you answer this question. It's a big deal. Everything is a story. Some people read that and want to push back immediately. And my response to saying that everything is not a story is that that's just your story about that. I developed that in some detail again in the book. What's my impact and what impacts me? Know what kind of wake you're leaving in your life, whether it's a positive wake or a negative wake, but you're impacting people and you are being impacted by others, right? Figure that out. That's a big deal. What am I not seeing? The essential questions for beginning to explore shadow in your own life, in the life of your family, in the life of your organization or your team, in the life of your nation, in the life of your species. What am I not seeing? We go into that in some detail. Who are my people? And there are many ways to explore that. The photographs up here, I'll just mention this quickly because there's some people I know personally here, from my cousins when I was about 10 years old at my grandparents' 50th anniversary, to my oldest friend, Paul, to my co-pilot and co-founder of Fully Human, Kent Frazier, to more cousins, to one of my buddies who's a professional clown who had his lung transplanted in March of 2023, to my parents and my sister, and to some of the teaching artists and educators I work with. So who are my people? With whom do you feel at home? There's not one right answer to that. And then I'm going to die. Own that. Don't make believe it's not going to happen, because it is going to happen. Given enough time, everyone dies. And it's really clear to me that there's one little part of that grave marker that's not filled in yet, and it's waiting for my name, right? It's real. So finally, here are these 6 of those questions and statements again, taking the 7th one and using it as a method of inquiry. So how am I in relationship with each of these questions and statements and with the rest of my life? If this were a workshop, you'd have some time to explore that in writing right now. And then once you did that, we'd come back and we'd put you into a breakout group, and we'd have you speak to the people in your breakout group about what arose when you wrote about how you're in relationship with some of these questions and statements. So with that, I just want to take a moment to thank some of the photographers who have made their photographs available for free on Unsplash. Some of them appeared, if you were looking at the slides, some of their names appeared directly beneath the slides, but then when there were multiple slides in a collage, I couldn't fit them. So I want to thank these folks for, again, donating their photographs and making them available to people like me. To finish up, the book website is healingamericasnarratives.com. There's a YouTube playlist with well over 100 short YouTube videos that unpack one item from one chapter, beginning with the beginning of the book, going right through to the end of the book. You can buy the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can ask your local bookstore or library to order it. And there's a series of essays. There's about almost 50 essays now that unpack one aspect or another of the book on medium.com. You can just find Reggie Marra there, and you can read the essays there. So thank you for tuning in to this brief introduction. I mentioned it's an introduction based on people's requests, what might happen in a 90-minute presentation or a 15-hour course. And there is a 45-hour course under construction, or in production, as you might say. But feel free to get in touch with me. Go to healingamericasnarratives.com website. You can find a way to get in contact with me there. And I'd love to hear from you. And with that, thank you for hanging in there through these 35 minutes. I said I'd try to bring this in between 30 and 40, so I'm almost perfectly there. Thank you again for your interest in this project, for the topic, for anything you might do to help heal America's narratives and begin to recognize, own, and integrate the collective shadow of the United States and your own individual shadow. That's an important bit of work to do, and I would not say that if I weren't doing my own work. So again, thank you for tuning in. See you the next time.